Hey guys, are you sitting at home wondering what to do with your own estate planning? Don't know exactly how to handle it? It's pretty complicated, right? Well, you're in luck. Today, we're talking about estate planning and your retirement. Thrilled to be here today. I'm Rob Tatro from robtatro.com, portfolio manager at Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. And today I have as our guest none other than our wealth and estate planning specialist, Adam Buss. Adam, let's bring him in right now. All right, good to see you, Adam. All right. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming to chat with me about estate planning. Huge topic, something that's on everyone's mind. Before we get to that, if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, please take a moment to subscribe and like. And if you'd like to book a no obligation consultation with us on this topic or on anything else, please go to www.speaktorob.com. So Adam, having a financial plan is one that I think most estate planning would likely begin with, right?
Yeah, I think a financial plan is important for everybody, especially for those in retirement. We want to identify, besides the regular retirement aspect, we want to look at the estate and how can we optimize that and what does it look like for the specific client and make sure that everything's properly planned for.
Okay, so you're doing estate planning. The term estate planning itself is a little bit of a misnomer. Some people don't really, I've heard it used around a lot. Estate planning specifically, how would you define it?
Oh, that's a great question, Rob. Well, first of all, the estate is basically the sum of everything that you own. And we want to make sure that kind of all the moving pieces are properly tied together. Now, first off, nobody likes talking about death. Nobody likes talking about their estate, but it is quite important to plan for. We want to look at, do you have your wills in place? Do you have power of attorney? Do you have living will, healthcare directive? All of those documents. Are your beneficiaries up to date on your various registered accounts, insurance policies? What insurance do you have in place to protect your estate, protect your family? Those are just a few of the examples that we want to look at.
Assuming you're looking at all of this in the bigger picture, we'd want to start with the goals, right? The goals and the objectives and actually what you want to do in your estate, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it all comes down to that's why there's not a one size fits all approach when it comes to financial planning or estate planning. We want to make sure that it's tied directly to your goals and objectives. Do you want to leave that family cottage to a specific child? Do you want to leave a legacy to a charity? What does a legacy mean to you? Do you want to spend all of your cash and pass away broke? It's different for everybody. We want to make sure that we are planning for that goal.
The cottage is a big one, eh, Adam? The cottage is a big one.
Absolutely, the cottage is a big one. And one thing that often goes with the cottage is having a large tax bill that goes along with it. You've had that cottage in the family for years. It's growing tax deferred. What's going to happen with that tax bill on death? Who's going to pay for it? Is it going to cause financial hardship for the next generation that has to take over the cottage?
Yeah, because the cottage is not a primary residence. So like you cannot avoid the tax that's going to be built on there because as you pass, it's a deemed disposition. Whether you give it to your kids or whether you give it to your grandkids, it's a deemed disposition and the government's going to want their cut of tax.
Absolutely. They're going to want their capital gains portion on that cottage for all the time that it's deferred. And what happens as well if there's more than one child involved? Are you going to leave the cottage to them equally? How's that going to play out? Or if one of them gets the cottage, what's the other one going to get to make sure everything is as fair as possible across the board? We often run into a similar problem when it comes to those who have a business or a corporation or a farm. How do we divide the assets, maybe not equally, but fairly amongst all the children?
Yeah, because you might have a situation where, you're running a farm or you're running a business and one of your kids is actively involved and has kind of taken over the business and or the farm. And you might have, 2 or 3 or 4 kids and there's not enough assets to equalize the actual estate. So then we get into a situation of maybe fair isn't necessarily equal, or maybe you want to take a look at life insurance to try to figure out a solution where you're trying to actually even out the actual amount that's being left to the kids. These are some of the solutions that we've seen, right?
Absolutely. I mean, using insurance as a common strategy to make sure that we have the liquidity needed for the estate to either equalize or make fair payments amongst the kids, cover the tax bill, look at tax optimization strategies, all kinds of different things that we can look at. But of course, it first comes down to going through the estate plan, going through the financial plan, making sure we are identifying the goals, objectives, what does the estate look like, the legacy, to make sure that again all of those moving pieces are tied together to achieve the client's goals and objectives.
Let's talk about estate taxation generally in Canada, Adam. So generally, I have an RSP or I have a RRIF. Let's talk about, first of all, how that gets taxed generally for most people. And then let's talk about maybe the non-registered assets, the home, and what happens typically to businesses or shares of businesses on a typical death in an estate. I know we don't know everyone's personal situation, but let's talk generally here. And let's start with the registered assets.
All right, well, let's start with the RSPs or the RRIFs or the lifts, whatever you want to call it. It is all tax deferred money. So if you still have a balance when you pass away, if you have a surviving spouse, typically those can roll over to the spouse and kind of remain exactly how it is, and the income stream just continues like it was before. However, on second person passing away, that's when the taxes are due. So let's say, as an example, you have $300,000 still in a RRIF or an RSP when you pass away. It's as if you made $300,000 on the last day that you're alive, and of course taxed accordingly. In most provinces across the country, you are taxed close to the 50% mark on the majority of those dollars. So that is a rather dramatic tax hit, right? In an ideal world, through proper financial planning, we have the ability to, over your lifetime, take it out and hopefully pay less than 50% tax. But of course, unexpected things happen, and that's what we want to try to plan for.
You and I like to call it the RRSP, or the registered asset meltdown strategy, to properly take into account that you can have many years of lower tax rate instead of having 1 year of 50% tax, right? If you properly melt it down at a lower tax rate over time, your estate can have a lot more assets after tax. And that's what we want to do. We want to leave, when we're planning, we want to leave the most amount of dollars for your estate, whether it's your grandkids, your kids, your favorite charity, whatever it may be. We want to leave the maximum amount of dollars there. Non-registered assets, I think that's a fairly simple one, but let's talk about how those are taxed.
Yeah, non-registered is fairly simple. It's a deemed disposition. So anything that has a capital gain that might not have had taxes paid on it, taxes are owed on that capital gain. They have a good portfolio manager, perhaps like Rob Tatro, building a large capital gain on those assets. It does get deferred, and of course it's cashed out upon your passing. But the principal isn't taxed because that's already after tax money, which is nice.
The home, we talked about it earlier, but the home is your principal residence. It is completely tax exempt, provided it is your principal residence. We talked about the cottage. The cottage typically, or a second home or a rental property, will have a deemed disposition on death. What have you seen in terms of businesses? I know it's a lot more complicated because you could have different shareholder structure, but typically talk about kind of what happens as a shareholder if I'm a sole proprietor, unincorporated, versus I'm a business owner.
I mean, sole proprietors are fairly easy because you are the business. So when you pass away, it just stops. It does get more complicated when you have a corporation involved. So the business doesn't pass away. However, the owner of the shares does. So whatever value is attached to those shares is subject to, estate taxes, deemed disposition rules, having to be dealt with by the estate. I mean, that's a whole other layer of complexity that can be involved. But of course, there is, capital gains taxation, perhaps additional dividend tax to get the money out of the corporation. I'm sure we have another video that talks in great length about retirement planning, succession planning strategies for business owners. So I'd certainly recommend checking that out.
The key, if you own a business, this is so critical. You need to make sure that your estate plan is done early so that you're not leaving your executor and your kids or whoever that may be with a veritable mess. So let's give a couple quick tips with respect to updating documentation. What are some of the documents that you looked at? You mentioned them earlier, but you talked about, wills, healthcare. What are some of the tips that you would tell a viewer out there?
Well, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to get into overly specifics on what you should put into the will. But having having a lawyer, draw up the will for you. Ideally, I mean, there are things such as will kits, but I find that
let's get it done by a lawyer.
Have it done by a lawyer. Have it done the right way. It'll save you time and money and headaches down the road just to have it done right from the get-go. Just because you have it done once doesn't mean it does not require updating as life goes on. Things change, life events happen. It's important that these documents remain up to date and continue to meet your wishes along the way. The other two documents, again, you'll have drawn up by your lawyer, is your power of attorney. So power of attorney is dealing with your estate while you're alive, perhaps you're out of the country, you need somebody to manage something for you. Perhaps you've lost mental capacity, you need somebody to look after your financial affairs. That would be a power of attorney document, would look after that. And then, of course, there's healthcare directive, at least that's what it's called in Manitoba, who can make those health decisions for you should you be unable to look after that yourself.
Fantastic stuff, Adam. This is all stuff that we here at the Tatro Wealth Advisory Group love to help our clients with. If this is on your mind, estate planning, and you're either approaching retirement or you already are retired and you'd like to take a look at your estate planning, please go to www.speaktorob.com. We'd love to book a no obligation consultation with you to chat about this, your estate, the planning that goes into it, or anything else that's on your mind with respect to investments. Adam, it was a blast today to chat with you about this. If you're watching on YouTube, please take a sec to subscribe. If you're watching on Facebook, like and share, or any of the other media platforms that you're watching on, please take a sec to share and like and subscribe. We always love that from our viewers. So again, I'm Rob Tatro from robtatro.com, portfolio manager at Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Adam, thanks for coming in on the show today, and thank you all for tuning in.